Hello, and welcome to the channel. Today, we're going to practice English in a simple and engaging way through the story of one of the most iconic figures of the ancient world, Cleopatra. As you follow her journey, you'll build your vocabulary, improve your listening skills, and learn natural English expressions. It's learning and history in one place. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. Let's get started! In vibrant Alexandria, in 69 BC, Cleopatra was born, a woman who would spark fascination, debate, and mystery for centuries to come. She didn't enter the world during a peaceful time. Quite the opposite. Alexandria, then the capital of Egypt, was a boiling pot of culture, politics, and tension. A true melting pot, where knowledge and power clashed daily. To be born a woman in that city wasn't just fate, it was a calling. It's curious how the place of birth can shape one's spirit. Alexandria mirrored the world. Egyptian, Greek, and Roman influences all blended into one breath of sea and sand. Surrounded by marble columns and the scrolls of the great library, Cleopatra grew up breathing that same air of greatness and challenge. Maybe that's why she always carried a spark in her eyes, a mix of restlessness and purpose. Mediocrity had no space in that city, especially not for royalty. And here's where most people get it wrong. They think her power was a stroke of luck, like fate just rolled the dice. But that's not how it worked. Cleopatra was born into a world where politics was brutal, and every gesture carried hidden meaning. A royal cradle, in truth, was a velvet trap. Being born into the throne in Alexandria meant being surrounded by subtle threats and hungry eyes. But even as a young girl, Cleopatra was never one to back down. Cleopatra's lineage was anything but ordinary. She came from the Ptolemaic dynasty, a bloodline forged in the aftermath of epic conquests founded by none other than Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's most trusted generals. And this isn't just historical trivia, it shaped everything. It wasn't simply noble blood running through her veins. It was a legacy saturated with ambition, strategy, and empire building. With every step, Cleopatra carried both the weight and brilliance of that past. Contrary to what many assume, the Egypt ruled by her family wasn't the same as the land of the ancient pharaohs. It was a Hellenized Egypt, where Greek customs dominated court life and the native culture was often sidelined. The Ptolemies were foreigners ruling a sacred land, which made their legitimacy fragile, always under scrutiny. That tension lingered over every royal decision, every alliance. It demanded more than lineage. It demanded genius. This is the moment where young Cleopatra began to understand the depth of the game she had been born into. She wasn't just heir to a throne. She was part of a dynasty walking a tightrope between prestige and rejection. In that unstable world, still echoing with tales of Alexander and his brilliant general, Cleopatra knew one thing. If she wanted to survive, no, to rule, she would need to prepare like no Ptolemy ever had. While most noble girls were trained in etiquette and silence, Cleopatra immersed herself in philosophy, natural sciences, and rhetoric. Her education wasn't just rare, it was nearly unheard of for a woman in her time. The tutors around her were hand-picked from the finest minds in the court, tasked with shaping not just a queen, but a strategist. And she didn't just absorb knowledge. She challenged, questioned, and pushed deeper. She wasn't a passive student. She was a fierce learner. On long afternoons in Alexandria, among white columns and fragrant gardens, Cleopatra would debate Aristotle's ideas, observe the stars, and master ancient Egyptian mathematics. None of it was for show. It was preparation. She knew an unstable throne demanded more than beauty or noble birth. It required a razor-sharp mind. And the more she learned, the more she separated herself from the role of a decorative ruler. Knowledge became her true armor. What most don't realize is how that education shaped every move she made later on. Every negotiation, every alliance, every decision carried the weight of years spent studying the minds of history's greatest thinkers. She was writing, step by step, her own manual for surviving and mastering the treacherous world of politics. And this was only the beginning, because beyond books and theories, Cleopatra held another rare weapon: the command of multiple languages. Picture a woman in the 1st century BC, fluent in at least 7 languages, switching from Greek to Hebrew, then to native Egyptian, as easily as changing robes. Cleopatra didn't just speak those languages, she used them strategically. Each one was a key, and she knew exactly which doors she wanted to unlock. That ability, nearly unmatched even among male rulers, gave her a kind of influence that could disarm emperors and impress scholars. But it wasn't only about communication. By studying medicine, alchemy, astronomy, philosophy, Cleopatra became a true intellectual force. Her depth of knowledge earned the respect of even the most learned men of Alexandria. And let's be clear, in a world where most women couldn't speak freely in their own homes, a queen fluent in multiple languages and educated in elite disciplines was a genuine threat to the status quo. Yet she never flaunted it for show. Cleopatra wielded her intelligence like a scalpel, sharp, precise, and never wasted. A tailored remark here, a strategic quote there, each carefully placed to build trust, expose weakness, or influence decisions. Her linguistic command gave her access to ambassadors, priests, traders, and thinkers. Every word she spoke carried not just meaning, but momentum, and soon that skill would become crucial in her fight for the throne. Unlike her predecessors, who ruled Egypt from a comfortable distance, Cleopatra embraced the land as her own. Egypt wasn't just territory to her. It was identity, purpose, and legacy. Though born of Greek blood, she became the first of her dynasty to learn the Egyptian language. That single act was revolutionary. Imagine the impact. A queen speaking directly to her people, without translators or filters. It wasn't just political. It was personal. She went further, adopting symbols that resonated with the hearts of the Egyptian people. Presenting herself as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis, Cleopatra didn't just borrow from religion. She became part of it. It was a masterstroke of strategy and sincerity. The people didn't just see a ruler. They saw a divine figure who understood their struggles and honored their traditions. That bond gave her something rare in monarchies: genuine popular support. This connection to Egypt became her anchor when everything else felt uncertain. She wasn't just seated on a throne. She was rooted in the soul of the land. Her love for Egypt wasn't performance. It was conviction, and it gave her the strength to face the first of many major challenges in her reign: the forced co-rule with her younger brother, Ptolemy III, a political arrangement that would soon explode into conflict. At just 18 years old, Cleopatra wasn't merely a well-educated young woman, she was already molded by duty. But even with all her preparation, she couldn't escape the brutal politics of succession. When her father died, she didn't inherit the throne alone. By royal decree, she was forced to co-rule with her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy III. And here's the bitter truth: he wasn't just a child, he was easily manipulated. That made Cleopatra an immediate threat to those who controlled him from the shadows. Sharing power with such an immature and controlled figure was like rowing solo through a storm. While Cleopatra sought stability and connection with the people, Ptolemy's advisors plotted behind palace doors, sowing mistrust and setting traps. The royal court, meant to be her home, turned into a battlefield of whispers and sabotage. Isolated but not defeated, Cleopatra relied on more than her intellect. She leaned on cold, strategic patience. That forced co-regency was a ticking time bomb. Cleopatra understood that if she didn't act, she would lose not just power, but possibly her life. The illusion of harmony on the throne was cracking fast, and when the blow finally came, she was ousted. But those who pushed her out underestimated one thing. Cleopatra didn't surrender to exile. She transformed it into a plan, and from the edge of the desert, she began crafting a comeback that would shock the world. Banished from Alexandria, Cleopatra didn't crumble. She recalibrated. Instead of retreating in defeat, she stepped into the desert, with her head high and her mind racing. She set up camp not in despair, but in strategy. And that's where true leadership reveals itself. In isolation, under pressure. Cleopatra wasn't just resilient, she was methodical. Exile for her wasn't the end. It was the staging ground for a comeback. Even in disadvantage, she didn't seek revenge blindly. She calculated. Like a seasoned general and an artist of persuasion, she rallied allies, regained followers, and held her dignity like a crown. While Alexandria simmered with palace conspiracies, Cleopatra was quietly fine-tuning her next move. Every day in the desert was a chess piece placed. She didn't rush, she prepared. And she knew the throne wasn't given. It had to be reclaimed, because returning didn't just mean reclaiming power. It meant returning stronger. Cleopatra wasn't aiming to be the queen she once was. She wanted more. Recognition from Rome, full control of Egypt, and a place on the global stage. But to achieve that, she needed someone equally powerful by her side. And that's when the pieces began to shift, setting the stage for a meeting that would redefine empires, the arrival of Julius Caesar. Few moments in ancient history are as dramatic as Cleopatra's first encounter with Julius Caesar. While others might have tried to make an impression with titles or gifts, she chose performance as her weapon. Wrapped in a rug, yes, literally, she was delivered in secret to Caesar inside the palace in Alexandria. The scene wasn't just bold, it was layered with meaning. She didn't arrive as a desperate exile, but as a queen declaring her presence on her own terms. Caesar, known for his sharp mind and unshakable discipline, was immediately intrigued. There was something about her that went beyond beauty. It was the way she spoke, reasoned, and predicted her enemies' moves. A veteran of countless wars and endless politics, Caesar realized that Cleopatra wasn't a pawn. She was a queen with political vision and charisma that commanded any room she entered. From that moment, the balance of power shifted. What began as a daring introduction quickly evolved into a deep alliance, both political and personal. Cleopatra didn't want a savior. She wanted a partner who saw Egypt the way she did, powerful, sovereign, and worth fighting for. Caesar, in turn, saw in her a gateway to expand his influence in the East. Their connection wasn't just chemistry. It was a pact between two minds ready to reshape history. And from that point on, nothing would ever be the same again. What bonded Cleopatra and Julius Caesar was far more than desire or convenience. It was a rare meeting of visionary minds, both of them seeing in chaos a chance to reshape the world. When Rome and Egypt united through them, it wasn't just a relationship. It was a collision of empires. And let's be clear, Cleopatra wasn't bending to Caesar, nor was he dominating her. They stood as equals, which, in that time, was almost unthinkable. Their union produced more than strategy. It produced a child. The birth of Caesarion was more than personal. It was political. It symbolized a bridge between East and West, between Egyptian royalty and Roman might. Cleopatra didn't see him only as her son, but as the living symbol of a future empire. And while Rome grew suspicious, she used the momentum to secure her reign, crush her rivals, and establish her rule with Caesar by her side. Their time together blended power and affection, strategy and intimacy. Cleopatra wasn't just a consort, she was a co-conspirator, a ruler in every sense. With Caesar's support, she expanded Egypt's influence, and with hers, Caesar secured his eastern front. But the Roman elite wasn't blind. The union stirred unrest. Rumors turned into threats. And soon, the eyes of an entire empire were watching, waiting for a misstep that could ignite war. When Cleopatra arrived in Rome, it wasn't quietly. It was a statement. She came in full regalia, lavish processions, exotic servants, dazzling jewelry, and a presence that didn't ask for approval. It commanded it. To many Romans, she looked like a myth come to life. Isis in human form, walking the streets of the empire's capital. Rome, so used to conquering others, now watched as a foreign queen conquered the imagination of its people. But admiration wasn't universal. Among the senators there was suspicion, even fear. Who was this queen, bold enough to live openly in Caesar's villa? And beside her, a child, Caesarion, rumored to be Caesar's son. Roman women whispered with resentment. Men in power eyed her with hostility. Cleopatra's very existence challenged their worldview. She didn't bow to Roman customs, she stood apart from them, and that was threatening. Still, she remained composed. She didn't hide, she walked with purpose. She didn't ask to be accepted. She acted as though she already was. Cleopatra turned every stare into a spectacle, every insult into silence. And although she was surrounded by tension, she stayed focused on her mission. Her presence in Rome was no accident. It was a calculated move, a quiet declaration of influence. But power that bold rarely goes unchallenged. And soon, fate would strike back. The news of Julius Caesar's assassination hit Cleopatra like a blade. In an instant, everything she had built in Rome vanished. Allies disappeared, doors closed, and curious eyes turned hostile. It was clear, without Caesar, she was a foreigner once again. But rather than panic, she responded with precision. Silently, she gathered her son, left behind the cold marble halls of Rome, and returned to the one place where her power was still unquestioned: Egypt. But this wasn't an escape. It was a tactical retreat. Cleopatra knew her survival, and her son's, depended on distance. Rome was unraveling in chaos and blood. Staying meant death, but in Egypt, she was still a goddess, a queen, a force. With loyal troops, political control, and public support, she could rebuild, and she would, because her power didn't come from Rome. It came from her will. Once again, Cleopatra turned loss into strategy. Her grief was quiet, but her focus sharpened. She returned not as a widow of Rome, but as the mother of a future ruler. From that moment on, everything she did would be to protect Caesarion and prepare him. She wasn't done building, not yet, because a new chapter was beginning. One that would reshape Egypt and train a boy to one day stand against empires. Back in Egypt, Cleopatra wasted no time mourning. Grief took a back seat. Rebuilding came first. She reorganized the army, modernized her defenses, and reinforced Egypt's position in the Mediterranean. The economy flourished once again under her guidance, trade routes reopened, and the people felt secure. It was as if Caesar's death had cleared her vision. From now on, it was her, alone, at the center of it all. And every decision mattered. She restructured the tax system, increased efficiency, and ensured that Egypt remained not just stable, but powerful. At the same time, she poured herself into preparing Caesarion. This wasn't about raising a prince. It was about shaping an emperor. From language training to political mentorship, he was brought up in both intellect and discipline. His childhood was filled with scrolls and swords, scholars and generals, and Cleopatra was behind it all. During this phase, she wasn't just a queen, she was a master planner. While Rome descended into chaos, Egypt stood tall. Her reign matured into something that earned the attention of neighboring rulers and Roman politicians alike. But Cleopatra knew this peace wouldn't last forever. And when word reached her of a new rising power in Rome, the charismatic general Mark Antony, she recognized the signal. The global chessboard was shifting once again. When Cleopatra was summoned by Mark Antony in Tarsus, she didn't just show up. She staged an entrance. She sailed up the river on a ship decked like a floating temple, with purple sails and clouds of incense, dressed as the goddess Isis herself. The river stopped to watch. This wasn't vanity, it was strategy. She knew Antony was fighting for power in Rome, and to win him over, she had to become unforgettable. And Cleopatra knew exactly how to own a scene. Mark Antony, a famous general, proud and impulsive, was instantly disarmed. Unlike Caesar, who admired her intellect, Antony was captivated by her presence, her aura, her boldness. They spent days together in a haze of conversation, wine, and negotiation. But behind every smile was calculation. Cleopatra didn't just charm, she assessed, positioned, and maneuvered. She understood what he needed, and offered more. From that moment, a different kind of connection was born. One of shared ambition and mutual gain. Antony needed resources to challenge Octavian. Cleopatra needed a new Roman ally to secure her empire's future. It was a perfect fit. But they both knew they were being watched. This time, it wasn't just about seduction. It was about navigating a political storm. And that storm was already rolling in from Rome. What began as a strategic encounter soon turned into a powerful bond. Cleopatra and Mark Antony became more than allies. They became inseparable. Their connection was rooted in admiration, shared vision, and a hunger for something greater. This wasn't a passing romance. It was a partnership between two rulers who believed they could reshape the world. Together, they didn't just dream, they acted. Their love produced 3 children, and with them, a bold plan. A unified empire that bridged Roman military might and Egyptian wealth and tradition. Cleopatra didn't see Antony as just a protector. She saw him as an equal, a partner in rule. And he found in her more than desire. He found a mind as sharp as his sword, someone who could stand beside him, not behind. But Rome didn't see it that way. Back home, senators whispered, enemies plotted. The union of Cleopatra and Antony wasn't just political, it was provocative. 2 worlds merging under one crown terrified the status quo, and that fear would soon give way to conflict. Because power like theirs didn't go unchallenged. A storm was coming, and it was personal. Cleopatra's relationship with Mark Antony quickly turned into a political flashpoint. In Rome, Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir and a master of propaganda, began painting Antony as a traitor, a man who had abandoned Roman values for a foreign queen. And the people believed it. What was once viewed as an exotic affair was now seen as a direct threat to the Republic. Roman pride turned into outrage. Things escalated when Antony officially left his Roman wife, who happened to be Octavian's sister, and openly declared his alliance with Cleopatra. That was all Octavian needed. He no longer had to invent an enemy. Antony and Cleopatra had given him one. She was portrayed as an Eastern temptress, a manipulator who wanted to turn Rome into an Egyptian puppet state. It wasn't just slander, it was war messaging. And as absurd as it sounded, it worked. The Roman people were ready for battle, and Cleopatra knew it. Her speeches became sharper, her movements more calculated. The dream she had built with Antony was now under siege. This wasn't just a power struggle. It was a war of symbols, of empires, of survival. And its turning point was fast approaching. In 31 trains, pre-1 BC, the blue waters off Actium became the stage for a battle that would decide the fate of empires. On one side, Octavian, leading a disciplined Roman force. On the other, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, with a powerful fleet but disjointed leadership and dwindling morale. What was meant to be their moment of triumph spiraled into chaos. Miscommunications, desertions, and conflicting strategies doomed them before the fighting had truly begun. Sensing the collapse, Cleopatra retreated with her ships, a move likely meant to preserve what little remained. Antony, believing she had abandoned him, broke down. The battle, already slipping away, turned into full defeat. But it wasn't just ships that sank that day. It was a vision. Their dream of a shared empire, blending east and west, crumbled in the salt and smoke of that final clash. Their return to Egypt was marked by silence and sorrow. Yet even in retreat, Cleopatra didn't crumble. There was still time, a sliver of hope. She knew survival now depended on strategy more than ever. And standing at the edge of fate, she began to prepare for what might come next. Because with Octavian closing in, the end was no longer distant. It was at her door. Back in Egypt, with Octavian's forces closing in, Cleopatra and Antony knew the end was near. Yet even surrounded by defeat, they kept their dignity. The royal palace in Alexandria had become a fortress of silence and waiting. Every step could be the last. Then tragedy struck. Antony, misled by a false report claiming Cleopatra was dead, fell on his sword. It was a desperate, loyal, and final act. Cleopatra found him dying and held him in her arms, not just a man, but the last symbol of a crumbling dream. When Octavian arrived, she understood what awaited her: public humiliation in a Roman victory parade. That she could never accept. She had lived as a queen, ruled as a goddess. She would not die as a captive. Instead, she chose her own end. She called for an asp, the sacred Egyptian cobra, a symbol of royalty and death. Its bite ended her life, but not her power. Cleopatra wasn't defeated. She took control of her final chapter. Her death wasn't surrender. It was a final act of resistance. With her, the last of the Ptolemaic dynasty fell, but a legend was born, one that would outlive empires. Yet one question still lingers in the shadows of history. What if she had won? Cleopatra died, but her name was never buried. Unlike so many rulers lost to history, she lived on. Controversial, mysterious, unforgettable. To some, a dangerous seductress. To others, a brilliant strategist. But one thing is undeniable. She was a woman far ahead of her time, who dared to challenge the most powerful empire the world had ever known with intellect, charisma, and bold political vision. And that alone makes her eternal. Egypt would never see another ruler like her. With her death, the country was absorbed by Rome and lost its independence. But Cleopatra's fight to preserve Egyptian identity, speaking the native language, honoring its gods, protecting its people, left an imprint that time couldn't erase. She wasn't just a monarch. She became a symbol, a woman who ruled without apology. In a world of emperors, she was her own empire. And perhaps the most fascinating part? The more they tried to reduce her to a caricature, a lover, a manipulator, a tragic queen, the more her myth grew. Books, plays, films, endless debates. Cleopatra became more than history. She became an idea. Her legacy isn't stored in treasure. It lives in her defiance, her ambition, her story. And one question still echoes. What would the world look like if she had triumphed? So, what did you take away from Cleopatra's story today? More than vocabulary or grammar practice, this journey showed how power, intelligence, and courage can echo across centuries. Cleopatra wasn't just a historical figure. She was a symbol of leadership in the face of chaos. Now tell me, what part of her story stood out most to you? Did you already know these details? Or did anything surprise you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And of course, if you enjoyed this content, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who wants to learn English in a smarter, more meaningful way. See you next time.